standing on the promises of Christ my King, through eternal ages and praises ring. Glory in the highest I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Standing, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God.
Good morning. Okay, we'll be looking at Matthew chapter 12 this morning. Begin with. Those who are visiting, we've been studying from the New Testament, dealing with the harmony of the Scriptures, and particularly Steve's been teaching in chronological order and then comparing the gospel accounts of different events which took place. And in his absence this morning, he's asked me to try to cover two stories that are given in Scripture concerning the Sabbath day. And so we're going to be beginning with Matthew chapter 12. And the other scriptures that go along with this particular story are found in Mark chapter 2 and Luke chapter 6. If you'd like to go ahead and mark those, because we'll be flipping back and forth between those three books, comparing the accounts which are given by the different gospel writers. One thing we want to point out to begin with is that, as Steve has said many times in this study, that the gospel writers, sometimes Matthew will, in his account, will give certain details that are not given in Mark and Luke and John and so forth, and vice versa. Sometimes they give details that he doesn't give. So as we go through the study this morning, we're going to look at some of those particular things. It's kind of like I'm standing up here in front of you, but how many of you know for a fact whether I've got a tie pin on or not? But I've been walking around here all morning, people have noticed me. Do I have a tie pin on? Anybody remember what it looks like? Okay, that's kind of the case with Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Each one, I do have a tie pin on, by the way, and it's a Boy Scout eagle pin. The accounts which are given by the different writers are based on what catches their attention a lot of times. Of course, we know that they're guided by the Holy Spirit in their writing, but there's still some human characteristics that are given to the writing as well. The way that they record things are based a lot of times on what they consider to be an important point. And we have to kind of keep that in mind as we study the Scriptures and we see the different accounts which are given, because sometimes there are some people who say, well, this writer says this and this writer says this, so that's a conflict. Well, no, it's not a conflict. It's just that one writer views it in a different way. And so because of those things, we have these slight differences in the accounts which are given. It'd be kind of dry reading if every book of the four Gospels was just a repeat of something somebody else had said. What would be the use in having four books saying the same thing? So we're looking at it that way too. beginning with verse 1, chapter 12. We're going to be reading the first 8 verses to begin with. It says, "At that time Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered, and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. But he said unto them, Have you not read that David did what David did when he was an hungered, and they were with him? As he entered into the house of God, and he did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them that were with him, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath day the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But as I said unto you, that in this place is one greater than the temple. But if ye had known ye had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day." Let's turn over and compare now what Matthew has said here with what Mark says, and then we're going to discuss these particular points just a little bit more. Mark chapter 2, verses 23 through 28. "And it came to pass that when he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day, and his disciples began, as they went, to pluck the ears of corn, and the Pharisees said unto him, Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? And he said unto them, Have you never read that what David said? When he was in need and was an hungered, he and they that were with him. Now he went into the house, how he went into the house of God in the days of the Abiathar, the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat, but for the priests, and gave it also to them which were with him. And he said unto them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath." During this particular time, we know for a fact through reading in Deuteronomy and Exodus and other places that it was lawful for a person who was hungry as they were traveling to pluck ears of corn or grain from the fields along the side of the road during that particular time to quench their hunger. And there was nothing illegal about it. It was a common practice. What the Pharisees here were concerned about was not the fact that they were hungry and that they were gathering food to eat, but that it was the Sabbath day, and so they were saying that the act of plucking this grain and eating it was an act of harvest, which was actually work. And of course they weren't supposed to do any work on the Sabbath day. And of course there's an ulterior motive as well here in the fact that they're trying to find something that Jesus is doing or allowing to be done that puts a bad light on him as well. They're trying to find something that they can use or accuse him of doing that would destroy his popularity, I guess you might say, at this particular time. So, because of these things, he is given, they're trying to accuse him of something. Now, along with this particular thing, he is pointing out to them, because he knows their heart, and so he's pointing out to them that this is a different circumstance. It's not an act of harvesting, basically, is what he's saying. And when we get over into Luke, we see that there's another comparison made here that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. Now, at this particular time also, he brings up the fact about David. And we can go back to the Old Testament scriptures. We're not going to take that time to do that right now. But the story he relates very well is that David, when he was hungry, and the men that were traveling with him, the other soldiers and so forth that were traveling with him at the time, they were hungry. So David goes into the temple and takes the showbread, which is legal only for the priest to eat, and he takes it, he eats of it, and he gives it to his soldiers also to eat. And that, he wasn't considered guilty of anything. He was considered blameless because of what he had done. The circumstances warranted that people were hungry, and that food was there for them to take. Also, Jesus also points out, well, what about the priests? What about those priests that are working in the temple on the Sabbath day, carrying out other things that are going on to carry out the ceremonies which are carried out each Sabbath day? Are they not working? He said, but they're considered blameless because of what they're doing. So, by the very essence of the events which take place on the Sabbath day at the temple requires some people to work. And he's pointing out here that that's no different. He says these people are considered blameless even though they're doing work on the Sabbath day. So what makes a person who is hungry and collecting food and eating it, why should they be considered guilty of something that somebody else is doing under the Scriptures? Now let's take a look at Luke chapter 6 and verses 1 through 5. Luke 6, 1 through 5 reads, And it came to pass on the second Sabbath after the first, that he went through the cornfields, and his disciples plucked the ears of corn, and did eat, rubbing them in their hands. And certain of the Pharisees said unto them, Why do ye that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day? And Jesus answering them said, Have ye not read as much as this, that David did when himself was hungered, and they which were with him, how he went into the house of God, and did take and eat the showbread, and gave it also to them that were with him, which is not lawful to eat, but for the priests alone. And he said unto them, that the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. So these three particular readings that we've covered here are basically pretty much the same. There's a couple of little things that are said here. Luke gives one more detail in the fact that he says it was the second Sabbath day after the first. And if we go back and cover those lessons which Steve has covered up to this point, we see that there are certain events that have led up to this. And the Sabbath day, which Sabbath day it was, is really not important, except that Luke considered it important enough to mention that it was the second Sabbath day, and the other two did not. That's why I said there's some differences, that are minor for the most part. Anyone have any comments to make along these lines about what's taking place here? Why do you suppose that priests or the Pharisees were so dead set against them plucking the corn? We refer to it as corn. We don't know if it was the corn that type of corn that we are familiar with here. Corn is a word that's used in the King James Version primarily to mean any type of grain. sorry. Okay, if you didn't hear it, she said they're looking for any excuse to bring up something against Christ. Okay. Any other comments? Any other chances to why they were there? You thought about it? Here it is. They're walking through the fields, and they're plucking corn as they walk along. And the Pharisees see this. How do you suppose they saw it? They must have been out there walking along in the corn too, right? Where were they supposed to be on the Sabbath day? Church? I don't think so. No churches have been established yet. The temple was there, of course. What? They should have been resting. Yeah. That's what the Sabbath day is for, right? A day of rest. So why? We don't know. It was. When people traveled at that particular time, they didn't stick to the roads a lot of times. I mean, if you're walking, you're going to take the shortest route you can, right? There's another thought too. Maybe the Pharisees were just following along and spying on him to see if they could catch him doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. Yeah. Sabbath day's journey. Anybody remind us how far a Sabbath day's journey was? Okay. Yeah, it's a very short distance. Remember now, a tenth of a mile is only 528 feet. That's not even the distance of two football fields. Yeah. How many of us, we were walking and hungry, and we came up on an apple tree, hanging on it. Say the tree is on the other side of the fence over there, but limbs are hanging over the tree. Would we not be tempted to pick an apple? Tommy's got tomato fields out here. People walking along the road and they get hungry and they say, "Oh, there's a tomato plant." Reach over and grab a tomato. You ever had that happen? I'm sorry, Pat. I didn't hear what you said. I missed that now. Pat?
One tomato not bad when they grab a box.
Oh, okay. Tom, would you say you'd had that happen? Yeah. It's not. At this now it's kind of considered illegal, to do things like that. But at that time it was not. It was a common practice, and it was very legal for people if they were traveling, they were hungry, and they had the opportunity to grab some food along the way, then they were given. As a matter of fact, it was a law that certain parts of a crop was not to be harvested. It was left there for that particular purpose, for those who were needy to glean from the edges of the field, from the corners and so forth, that fence rows, things like this, that they might, have something to eat. So we begin to wonder why in the world were the Pharisees there in the field to begin with. Somebody mentioned the 7th day's journey, and Pat mentioned how far it was. I don't remember right offhand exactly how far a 7th day's journey was, but the point was it was a very short distance, and usually it was, the travel was just mainly for emergency type purposes. It's not like us. We go out for a Sunday evening drive, and we may drive 30 or 40 miles or more. That wasn't possible at that particular time. And, of course, it wasn't lawful. Okay, any other comments about this particular story? Okay. Turning back now to Matthew chapter 12 and verses 9 through 14. It says, and when he had departed thence, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man which had his hand withered. And they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days? That they might accuse him. And he said unto them, What man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hand on that sheep and lift it out? How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore is it lawful to do well on the Sabbath day? Then said he unto this man, Stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole as the others. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. Okay. And Jesus is teaching a very important lesson here. Number one is, of course, he's answering this question. They've asked him, is it lawful for a person to do good on the Sabbath day? Of course, they word their question, is it lawful on the Sabbath day to heal on the Sabbath day? But basically, Jesus answered them and says, is it not good to do anything good on the Sabbath day? Now, I don't know why that they would consider healing not a good work. Basically, I think what they're doing is they're bringing in more. They're adding to God's word. God said that the Sabbath day was set apart for a day for man to rest. That you do no work on the Sabbath day. And they considered healing someone actual work. What is our definition of the word work? Okay. You didn't hear Patty say physical movement of an object from one place to another. Anybody else have another definition? Exerting energy in order to carry out some movement of an object. Anyone else? Okay. Eric said exerting energy for profit or for gain. Anyone else? Okay. Remember those because we're going to talk a little bit more about them in a minute. Let's take just a moment and go ahead and look at the next set of verses that go along with this, and that's Mark chapter 3. Now, notice that in Matthew's account, he says, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? Mark says And he entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there with a withered hand. And they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. Of course, they're talking about watching Jesus now. And he said unto the man that was withered with the withered hand, Stand forth. And he said unto them, Is it lawful, and this is Jesus speaking now, he says, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day, or to do evils, to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. And when he had looked around about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he said unto the man, Stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored whole as the other. And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. So we see here that Mark gives a couple of details that Matthew doesn't give in this particular point. First of all, he records it as Jesus speaking forth and asking the question, is it lawful? Of course, they had already, in their hearts, they had already told him what they were there for. And the question was, he just presents them with the same question that they're asking. Something that they're trying to accuse him of. But he kind of twisted in the fact that where they're watching him to see if he's going to heal somebody on the Sabbath day, he turns the question around and says, well, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? Not just to heal someone, but to actually do good for them. Or do evil. Well, if it's not lawful to do good, is it lawful to do evil? And I think what he's doing is he's making them kind of answer their own question. If you know it's to do good and you don't do it, then what have you done? You've done evil, right? If you know there's good to be done and you don't do it, then what have you done? I think that's kind of the predicament that Christ is throwing back at them and saying, hey, you need to look at this a little bit closer. All right. I have the power to heal this person. If I don't heal that person, then what have I done? I've neglected my responsibilities, right? Or neglected what I can do. I haven't done good to him. Right. They just kept silent. Right. And that's something that Mark points out here. They just held their peace, didn't say anything. Right. So what do? They go out and they start plotting against him. And of course they bring in this other group, the Herodians. Not only is it just now the Pharisees that are dealing with this particular thing, now they're bringing in other people to try to accuse him even more about what he's done. Okay? Let's look now at Luke's account of this particular one. It's chapter 6, verses 6 through 11. And it came to pass also on another Sabbath that he entered into the synagogue and taught, and there was a man whose right hand was withered. And the scribes and Pharisees watched him, whether he would heal on the Sabbath, they might find an accusation against him. And he knew their hearts. And he said to the man which had the withered hand, Rise up, stand forth in the midst. And he rose and stood forth. Then said Jesus unto them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath days to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? And looking around upon them all, he said unto the man, Stretch forth thine hand. And he did so. And his hand was restored whole as the other. And they were filled with madness, and communed one with another what they might do to Jesus. So Luke's account is very similar to Mark's account about what took place here. About the only difference in Luke's account, he says that this was on a different Sabbath day than the one that they had talking about previously when he was talking about the men that were going through the corn and picking. Luke's account on that particular one says that happened on the second Sabbath day, and then when he gets down into this other account, this other story here, he says, and on another Sabbath day they were in. So Luke says that these two events didn't happen both at the same time on the same day. Not important as far as the essence of the stories are concerned, but pointing out, of course, the slight differences in the account. The story that Matthew gives, of course, has a comparison, has another sideline story. It says, well, if your animal fell into a ditch, would you not pull it out on the Sabbath day? Now, Pat's definition of work on the Sabbath day, pulling that animal out of the ditch would be considered work. Remember Pat's definition says that he moved something from one place to another. Somebody else said to expend energy to move something from one place to another. I think Eric said to gain. Well, wouldn't it be a gain to you to save your animal other than letting it die? So all these definitions of the word work are implied here. When you pull that animal out of that ditch, you're doing work. But, the law says you won't work on the Sabbath day. Under the old law, under the Mosaic law. So, what are we to look at here? Were they doing work? By our own definitions today, they were performing work, right? Was it lawful to do work on the Sabbath day? Not according to the law. But remember what happened with David? So we see that there are circumstances which just common sense is going to override the fact that there are certain types of work that were allowed on the Sabbath day. Not only that, but even Scripture itself, even the law itself said that some people had to work on the Sabbath day. The priests and the people who worked in the temple to carry out the functions of the temple and the worship services that were going to be taking place in the temple had to work. Who moved that showbread from one place to another? Priests had to do that, right? So we see that there are certain things that the priests and the scribes were trying to hold up as law, which were additions to the law that God had actually given. We see from the circumstances which are given here that there are certain things that God allowed to be taking place on the Sabbath day that the priests and the scribes were trying to use against Christ so that they could accuse him of doing something that the law forbid, or bad. Any other comments or questions about what took place on these particular two instances? It's not. Now he makes this very clear on all three accounts, all three books here, that the Son of Man was Lord of the Sabbath. Now, what happens when Christ dies concerning the Sabbath day? It's done away with, right? The laws concerning the Sabbath day were not, for lack of a better word, carried over into the New Testament because of the fact that Jesus was Lord of the Sabbath. Pointing out also what one of the writers here points out very well in saying that the Sabbath was made for man. Not man for the Sabbath. What it says. Now, the Lord set up the Sabbath day to be time for man to rest, right? Jesus says, I'm Lord of the Sabbath, so I can do what I want to about it. Basically, is what he's pointing out here. And he's trying to get that point and that lesson across to these scribes and Pharisees, and they don't get it. But any other comments? Thank you for your attention. We'll pick up at that particular point next week.
What shall